This is Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google search for my site. From Smithsonian Magazine, November 2009. It's more than a decade after Smithsonian published this that I, Tom Duty, am reading it. Emmette Till's casket goes to the Smithsonian, November 2009. Simeon Wright recalls the events surrounding his cousin's murder and the importance of having a casket on public display. Smithsonian Magazine, November 2009. In 1955, Emmette Till, a 14-year-old African-American visiting Mississippi from Chicago, was murdered after whistling at a white woman. His mother insisted that her son be displayed in a glass-topped casket so the world could see his beaten body. Till's murder became a rally point for the civil rights movement, and his family recently donated the casket in which he was buried to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Till's cousin, Simeon Wright, now 67, was with him the night he was kidnapped, murdered, and spoke with magazine's Abby Callard. What was Emmett like? He loved to tell jokes. He had a love for people to tell him jokes. In school, he might pull the fire alarm just to get out of class. To him, that would be funny. He found out that what was dangerous to him, to us, was funny to him. He really had no sense of danger. What happened at the store between Emmett and Carolyn Bryant has been debated. What do you remember happening? We went to the store that night. My nephew came down from Chicago with Emmett. They went to the store first, and Emmett went into the store with him. So Wheeler came out, and Maurice sent me inside the store to be with him to make sure he didn't say anything out of line. There was about less than a minute that he was in there by himself. During that time, I don't know what he said, but when I was in there, he said nothing to her. He didn't have time. She was behind the counter, so he didn't put his arms around her or anything like that. While I was there, he said nothing. But after we left the store, we both walked out together. She came outside going to her car. As she was going to her car, he did whistle at her. That's what scared her so badly. The only thing that I saw him do, that he did, whistle. Because he was from Chicago. Do you think it's Emmett's unfamiliarity with the South during Jim Crow era contributed to what happened? Could have been the reason he did it. Because he was warned not to do anything like that. How was he supposed to act? I think he did. He was trying to impress us, he said. You guys might be afraid to do something like this, but not me. Another thing, he really didn't know the danger. He had no idea how dangerous that was. Because when he saw our reaction, he got scared too. You were in the same bed as Emmett when the two men came for him, right? Yes, when they came that night, that Sunday morning, he and I were in the same bed. I was the first one to wake up because I heard the noise and the loud talking. The men made me lie back down and ordered Emmett to get up and put on his clothes. During that time, I had no idea what was going on. Pretty soon, my mother came in pleading with them not to take Emmett. At that point, she offered them money. One of the men, Bryant, he kind of hesitated at the idea, but J.W. Milam, he was a mean guy. He was the guy with the gun and the flashlight. He wouldn't hear of it. He continued to have Emmett put his clothes on. Then after Emmett was dressed, they marched him out of the house into a truck where he was waiting outside. When they got out to the truck, they asked the person inside the truck, "Is this the right boy?" The lady's voice responded that it was. You attended the trial. Were you at all surprised that the murderers were acquitted? I was shocked. I was expecting a verdict of guilty. I'm still shocked. I believe sincerely that if they had convicted those men 54 years ago, that Emmett's story wouldn't have been in the headlines. We'd have forgotten it by now. Your family left Mississippi after the trial, right? My mother left the same night he was taken. She left the house. She didn't leave Mississippi. She left the house and went to a place called Summer, where they had the trial. Her brother lived in Sumner, and she stayed there until his body was found. She was on the same train that the body was going back to Chicago. We left my dad and his two brothers, left the Saturday and Monday after the verdict. The verdict came in on a Friday. I believe that Monday we were on a train headed to Chicago. Why did you leave? My mother she was so scared. There was no other way that my dad was going to be able to live there anymore. After the verdict, my dad was so disappointed. He had had enough of Mississippi. He had heard of things like this happening to African Americans, but nothing had ever happened to him. Like that first-hand victim of racism and the Jim Crow system. He said that was enough. He didn't want no part of Mississippi anymore. How did you and the rest of your family feel about Emmett's mother's decision to hold a funeral with an open casket? Well, an open casket is a common thing for African American tradition. One of the reasons they didn't want to open the casket was because of the stench, because of the smell. They designed the casket with the glass over it and whatnot. She said herself she wanted the world to see those men had done to her son because no one could have believed it if they didn't picture it or see the casket. No one would have believed it. And when they saw what happened, this motivated a lot of people that were standing. What we called on the fence against racism. It encouraged them to get in the fight and do something about it. That's why many say that was the beginning of the civil rights era. For experience, you can add what they mean by that is we always, as people, African Americans, were fighting for our civil rights. But now we had the whole nation behind us. We had whites, we had Jews, Italians, Irishmen jumping in the fight, saying that racism was wrong. How did the casket become available? In 2005, we had to exhume Emmett's body. The state of Mississippi would not reopen the case unless we could prove the body buried at the cemetery was Emmett's. State law prohibits us from placing the casket back into the grave, so we had to bury him in a new casket. We set this casket aside to preserve it because the cemetery was planning on making a memorial for Emmett and his mother. They was going to have his mother to have the casket on display, but you see what happened. Someone took the money and discarded the casket in the shed. How did you find out about the casket? A radio personality called me about 6 in the morning asking me questions about it. They were on top of what was going on the cemetery. I told them what we supposed to happen to the casket. He kept saying and asking me questions. Wait a minute. Let me go out and check and see. I don't know what's going on. Let me go out to the cemetery and get some answers. Find out what's going on there. That's when I saw the casket sitting in the shed, deteriorating. The last time my cousin saw the casket, it was inside the building, preserved. We don't know who moved it out to the shed, but I got a chance to see it. It was just horrible. The way they had discarded it, like, wasn't even anything, without notifying us. They could have called the family, but they didn't. Why did you decide to donate the casket to the Smithsonian? Donating to the Smithsonian was beyond our wildest dreams. We had no idea that it would go that high. We wanted to preserve it. We wanted to donate it to a civil rights museum. Smithsonian? I mean, that's the top of the line. I didn't even cross our mind that it would go there. But when they expressed interest in it, we were overjoyed. It meant people are going to come from all over the world. They are going to ask questions. What's the purpose of it? And then their mothers or fathers or curator, whoever's leading them through the museum, they'll begin to explain and tell them the story of what happened to Emmett. What he did in Mississippi and how it cost him his life, and how a racist jury knew that these men were guilty, but then they go free. They got a chance to hear the story, and they'll be able to, perhaps, a lot of these young kids, perhaps, they will dedicate their lives to live to the law, enforcement, or something like that. They will go out and do their best to help the little guys that can't help themselves. Because in Mississippi in 1955, we had no one to help us. Not even the law enforcement. No one to help us. I hope that this will inspire our younger generation to be helpers to one another. What feelings do you experience when you see the casket today? I see something that held the object of a mother's unconditional love, and then see a love that was interrupted and shattered by racial hatred without a cause. It brings back memories that some would like to forget, but to forget is to deny life itself. For as you grow older, you are going to find life is laced with memories. You're going to talk about the good old days. When you're 50, you're going to talk about your teenage days. You're going to listen to music from your teenage days. You don't have to believe me. Just trust me on that. I'm not talking about whatever I read in a book. I'm talking about what I've experienced already. Also, it brings to our memories where we have been, where we are now, and where we are going. People look at this casket and say, "You mean to tell me this happened in America?" And we will have a part of the artifacts from the era to prove to them that things like this went on in America. Just like the Civil War, by historians of the Civil War, even today, it seems impossible to me that the Civil War took place in America. Here you have white fathers and sons against each other, mothers and daughters fighting against each other, because one felt that slavery was wrong and the other was sure it was right. They began to kill each other over that. It's hard for me to believe, but I see the statues. I see the statues, the soldier, the Union soldiers, and the Confederate soldiers. And it just helps me to believe the past. This casket's going to help millions to understand and believe that racism and the Jim Crow system was alive and well in America back in 1955. This has been Tom Duty, middle-aged American living in New Jersey near the Lincoln Tunnel. If you were to visit my website, you would type Howdy Doody into Google. You'll find the correct spelling of the famous puppet. You then combine Tom Duty in a Google